2, 1.
Welcome to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth. Welcome to Life on Earth.
Hello, you good people, and welcome to Life on Earth. Thank you for joining us. Today is April 28th, 2022, and we got to talk.
We're talking about sex.
We're talking about, well, all that and more. All of that and more as objectivists, as people who regard life on Earth as an end in itself, and our own happiness as the highest reward of the exercise of our virtues. We're all for sex, right? Right. Leonard Peikoff famously shared in OPAR and also in his several of his Q&As that he once asked Ayn Rand, what does philosophy have to say about sex? And he explains her answer was, it says that sex is good.
It's so good. It's really good.
Of course, my immediate reaction was, I don't know, not all sex is good, but philosophically, sex is good. Now, the topic came up last week in a couple different ways. And the one that stands out, and this is where I'm going to start, is in Ayn Rand's fiction.
Her fiction.
In fact, this book we're going to talk about at length. But actually, I have to go to another book first.
Okay.
And this is why. There was a post in the Ayn Rand group, the public group, so I don't feel too bad mentioning it on the show. But in the public group, somebody posted a question about Ayn Rand's the romantic interest in Ayn Rand's heroes. In fact, he said specifically, I've heard women mention a romantic attraction to one of the main male characters in Atlas. And, you know, there are debates about that. In fact, you can tell us in the chat, because we have gals in the chat, which is cool to see. I'm going to talk about men and women. I'm sorry, I'm not going to get into the other genders today, but don't feel excluded.
Well, I would say that there's some similarities between same-sex relationships as well.
It's all good. We're full spectrum here, but there are gals in the chat. Gals in the chat, let me know. Francisco, Hank, John Galt.
Yeah, not Eddie though, unfortunately.
Well, if Eddie's your pick, make him your pick. That's relevant, actually, to that, and I'll tell you why. Or you could also pick Howard Rourke if you want. You can go Rourke if you want, but really, come on, Francisco, Reardon, Galt. And it's funny, nobody calls Francisco D'Anconia. No, it's always Francisco. So if you like Francisco, that tells us something about your particular style, your joie de vivre. But in the chat, Francisco, Reardon, Galt, and Rourke. But the funny thing is, this guy writes, and this is somebody I respect. I'm not trying to dig on him. I've heard women mention a romantic attraction to one of the main male characters in Atlas, but I've never heard men mention Dagny in that way. Has anyone else noticed this? And if so, why do you think that is? Now, I don't have the whole discussion in front of me, but it came to pass that the poster and several people who were coming from the same place believed that Dagny's not hot.
God, is she ever
Dagny
hot?
is not, she's just not hot.
So hot.
You know, no guy wants a woman who's, you know, more powerful than him, doesn't really need him. Dagny's just not hot. Now here's the reason. It's funny that you mentioned Eddie, is that people in this thread did say now Cheryl Brooks. Cheryl Brooks is hot. Well, what do you mean? What's hot about Cheryl Brooks? She's going to be hot. She's kind of coming into her own.
Right. She's a coming of age story.
But she's already got the hero worship thing. And she's described as cute. And I kind of think of her in a Jean Arthur kind of way, not so much Rita Hayworth.
True.
Cheryl Brooks is hot and Dagny Taggart. So anyway, gals.
That's crazy talk.
Gals, you tell me Francisco, Reardon, Galt. But guys, this is your question. Is Dagny hot? You know,
well,
Christopher's already in there with
total Dagny
crush. Okay. I mean, spoiler alert, that's me too.
Okay, like, first of all, I mean, Dagny and Francisco's relationship, they were 16 years old and they learned everything with each other.
Oh my God, we're going to talk about that
out
too.
In the woods.
I'll be reading excerpts. Yes, that's exactly right. But we're going to pivot.
Yeah.
We got to pivot because it wasn't just this fun. Oh, yeah. Your answer, by the way, on that post, Amy Nasir says Dagny was super hot with Hank. Her laughter after being called a whore, standing up naked and speaking the truth, the ruby pendant, the bracelet exchange, the scenes with Francisco in the woods, the slap that Amy goes on.
The slap.
Links to this are in the show notes. You need to read Amy's response. I thought I had a pretty good response, but Amy was right on the money there.
It just all came back. I'm like, this is, of course she's hot.
Incredibly hot. And read the book. It makes perfect sense that each one of these three men wanted to be with her. It was funny too, because somebody also brought up, I don't know about Dagny. She was kind of loose and, what are you talking about? In her entire life, she slept with three men. In her entire life, she only had three great romances in her life.
What a harlot.
And every one of those romance was deep and value-based and committed and purely, she was faithful to each one of them.
Yeah.
Oh man, she really got around.
Oh, okay. Now, just so you know, I'm going to butt in because, by the way, this is going to be very tangential, I think, and not very organized. But Robert organized it. But
I'm sure it'll be right on point.
In. But I got to tell you, I'll just give you a clue as to why people thought that Dagny was loose and maybe even unfair in her relationships. And because I think a lot of people, and I felt this way too, felt sorry for Hank. But you got to realize,
dude was married.
The dude never got divorced.
He never left his wife to say, "Oh, Dagny, I got to be with you."
Yeah.
And he pays for it, and he acknowledges that at the end. But still,
yes, he made some mistakes that were not particularly romantic.
I got a ton of resources in the links. One of the ones I should have posted, I'll add it later, was my explanation for why Dagny had to end up with the guy she ended up with. Why it couldn't be Hank. Couldn't be Francisco. There's spoilers in this discussion, folks. I'm trying not to be too specific. But no, you're absolutely right.
We're talking about sex. Everybody close your ears and say la la la.
Now let me get to the meat and the potatoes, because as fun as this discussion was last week, Allie says chocolate is not negotiable. Speaking of sex, you're absolutely right. Chocolate is not negotiable. Last week, Lee Pearson, the great mind Lee Pearson, with his show The Cutting Edge, had a clubhouse, and they were talking about movies. It was the funniest thing because Lee talks about epistemology and psychoepistemology and where he disagrees with Ayn Rand and the conversations he has with Harry Binswanger on epistemology. And
super brainy.
But last week he was talking about movies.
Yeah.
He talking about movies. So he was a clubhouse afterward, long clubhouse. It got contentious. Some of the people in our chat know exactly what I'm talking about. One of the things that came up was the Fountainhead. And I mentioned...
Were people starting to talk dirty to each other?
Depends on how you define your terms. I've always said before, if you define your terms broadly enough, everything is sex. So we're talking about movies and it gets into the Fountainhead. And I said, well, one of the things about the Fountainhead, I don't remember how it came up, but what Howard Rourke does in that movie, well, really what he does in the book, the rape scene, is explained throughout. You know exactly how things happen, but nobody would do that in real life. Nobody would have that kind of information that he had. Nobody would, it would never actually, it's never the right thing to do. Well, that turned out to be controversial.
Yeah.
Like how can that be controversial?
I have a different view of that as well, because I think that could happen in real life and
to be the right thing to do.
Yes. And be the right thing to do. Because it wasn't a rape scene.
Well, that's true.
So not a rape scene.
Well, that's true. Ayn Rand did say, when asked about it in an interview, she said, if that was rape, it was rape by engraved invitation.
Yeah, I just reread it, and I read it from the time that Dominique laid eyes on Howard Rourke. What am I saying? On Howard Rourke in The Quarry. The first time she laid, she was wearing this color. This is the color that she was wearing in the hot summer sun of the quarry, and the men down there with jackhammers, sweltering in the sun is worse than a chain gang, paying some terrible penance like in hell. And here she is in her beautiful light blue flowing dress, mocking them, like just throwing insults at them without even having to say anything. And here she locks eyes with Howard Roark. And it starts from there, folks. You need to go back and read from that moment.
Yes.
The exchanges that they are having without words at first. And then
funny you
with
say
words.
that, because in my notes it says, if anybody's unclear about this, it's worth revisiting the sequence of events leading up to that scene. Dominique seeks Roark out in every scene, through every line in every scene. The action is initiated by her, from their meeting in the quarry to their first conversation, to the pretense of having a fireplace to fix, to his first visit to the mansion, to her outrage when Pasquale Orsini shows up to fix the fireplace, and her striking out at him on the path when she goes to find out, why the hell wasn't it you? All of the action is hers. And when he finally arrives on that fateful night, she doesn't call out. And the narration makes it clear, because you get to know what's going on in her head and in his head. This was not sexual assault.
Can I just read a little bit of this? This
Yes,
is the
please.
first sighting. This is their first words together. She says to him, "Why do you always stare at me?" She asked sharply. She thought with relief that words were the best means of estrangement. She felt terror at the thought that he would not answer, that he would let his silence tell her too clearly why no answer was necessary. But he answered. He said, "For the same reason you've been staring at me. I don't know what you're talking about. If you didn't, you'd be much more astonished and much less angry, Miss Francon." So there is this constant tug of war between her, as loudly and clearly as possible, saying that she wants him, and every single thing that she says and every look and gesture that she gives him, all throughout this. And there's a couple of conversations that they had even before the time that he comes over and fixes her fireplace. And he's like, now it's broken, Miss Francon. Now we need to fix it.
And get that squeak out of your door. Oh no, that's chocolate.
Yeah, that's chocolate. But
yeah, Andrew Bernstein goes through this scene in even greater detail. And he points out after the scene, Dagny is laying in the bathtub. She's like, this thing just happened. I've got to wash. And she lays in the bathtub and she can't get herself to turn on the water.
Yeah, actually,
Bernstein says that if anybody were to come along and try to wash her, she would kill him.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Robert, but she doesn't get into the bathtub.
Oh, she didn't make it into the bath.
She couldn't even get herself to get over into the bathtub. She just lays on the tile floor all night long. And it's funny because when I remember that there was some indication of her having bruises, afterwards and everything. No, it was actually bruises from his mouth on her that she was looking at in the mirror as she went in the bathroom.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I'll be reading about that too.
Good.
But first,
I
have to mention an essay that is very interesting. It was written by Carrie Ann Biondi. It was published some years ago, called "Surrender" in the Fountainhead.
Well, Carrie Ann is pretty darn cool.
Carrie Ann's the best. And she wrote, "It's my contention, which may sound counterintuitive to many objectivists, that the title of this post, Surrender in the Fountainhead, is not an oxymoron. Isn't surrender a case of giving oneself up to an enemy, relinquishing one's values, giving in to the less than best? Isn't that immoral on Ayn Rand's view? Well, it depends on what one means by surrender. Rand was sensitive to and used multiple senses, both positive and negative, for the word surrender. After combing through the Fountainhead with this issue in mind, I was surprised to find at least 15 instances of this word throughout the novel, and that most of the uses are positive ones. There are 3 contexts of use, with 1 being negative and 2 being positive." And then she gives examples. I'm going to just skip to a quick relevant point here, because it's not just that Dominique surrenders herself to Howard Rourke. She says the most positive use of surrender, which occurs in a sexual context and reflects Rand's views about the passionate response of one romantic partner to another. Rand focuses primarily on a female's surrender or submission to a man, but she also has an interesting scene where Howard surrenders to Dominique. And then she reads a long passage I won't read right now, but it ends with, she tried to demonstrate her power over him. She stayed away from his house. She waited for him to come to her. He spoiled it by coming too soon, by refusing the satisfaction of knowing that he waited and struggled against his desire, by surrendering at once. He would lie at her feet. He would say, of course I need you. I go insane when I see you. You can do almost anything you wish to me. The words did not sound like surrender because they were not torn out of him, but admitted simply and willingly. And this occurs throughout the book. And Carrie Ann goes on to explain that this notion of surrender being in some contexts a good thing, it even applies to Rourke and Winant. You think of Howard Rourke laying on the grass in front of the Winant house, or back on the boat when they go away. They went away for what, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, half the summer. And he completely surrenders himself to Gale's power when he's swimming in the ocean, and Gale could have just left him there to die, to drown. And of course, Winant can't do it because the power that would give the power that he has that makes him able to do that is the same power that makes it impossible, because Rourke means too much to him. But that theme of surrender and the fact that Rourke is no more forcing Dominique to submit than he is submitting to her in every relevant sense.
Yeah.
I looked up the Playboy interview. If you talk about sex, you got to look up the Playboy interview, right?
Yeah. But we do have a quick question I'd like to answer.
What's going on in the chat?
Yeah. There? Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so very much. We've got Allie with $2.
Reardon, because he deserves better. And Dagny is bae.
Yes, that's very true.
Dagny as bae. I can't imagine Dagny being my baby, but it's cute.
And
it's
Maria says, which would you give up, sex or food?
Which would you give up, sex or food? Well,
I mean, food obviously can't give up food because you'll die. But I take it to mean like sweets and things like that, really pleasurable, enjoyable food, or steak or something like that. Which on the
other hand, I have actually gone on a 5-day fast.
Now, does sex mean oral sex or masturbation, or is it just intercourse?
Sex means everything. We need to have that conversation too. Because seriously, when people talk about sex, half the time they're either unclear or they don't know what they're talking about. Sex includes anything that you wouldn't do with anybody not your romantic partner.
Yeah.
No, seriously, if you were to go to the beach and you were to start rubbing some random guy's legs.
Hello.
And you're going to tell me that wouldn't be a sex. I mean, it's not intercourse. Nobody's going to get pregnant.
Right.
You're going to tell me that's not sexual? That's not sex? No.
It is.
Yeah. Now, again, I have fasted for 5 days without food, nothing but water. But 5 days without sex. So that question is not as obvious to answer as you might think.
Because the question I have is, my theory is that Dominique was not sexual with herself. That's my theory, that she was, when she went to Rourke after, now this was the second time her and Rourke made love in his apartment, and she went to him and she's like, I want you, like a whore and all of this, but I'm going to keep, I won't come here unless I beat you, and I'm going to keep.
Yes, I'm going to destroy you.
I'm going to keep trying to destroy you, and the way that Ayn Rand said, the way that she sounded when she was repeating all this to him or saying this to him was like some sort of chaste. Like statement of faith kind of thing.
Yes. And she says, and I'm going to hope that I can't destroy you. And that's part of it too. And she goes on in this almost contradictory way, except you can see it's not contradictions, it's layers. And then Howard Rourke finally says, how much are you capable of lying to yourself?
Well, actually, before that, she says, now, what do you want me to do? Take your clothes off.
Oh, yeah. I bristle when you say, well, I don't think Dominique was sexual before Howard Rourke. Except then think about the first time that she sleeps with Peter Keating. And she has no reaction to him.
Right.
And she says, see, Peter, you have no rivals, but that includes you too. I'm the thing you've never met, a perfectly frigid woman. She doesn't. So you're right. I guess she doesn't think of herself as sexual until Howard Rourke.
Until Howard Rourke.
That's kind of inconceivable to me, but that's the way it's laid out.
Well, there are people in the asexual community, and there are people who struggle with that. So
it's complicated.
It's complicated. But yeah, and I think we had another. Maria asks, didn't Dominique surrender to herself, not to Rourke?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the right way to put it.
That's right. Yep. That's a great observation, Maria. And thank you, Apollo, for the £2. Excellent.
We have to make jokes about pounds because all the pounds we can get during the sex show is a good thing. So Ayn Rand's Playboy interview, and the interviewer asks, you have denounced the Puritan notion that physical love is ugly or evil, yet you have written that, quote, indiscriminate desire and indiscriminate, unselective indulgence are possible only to those who regard sex and themselves as evil, unquote. Would you say that discriminate and selective indulgent in sex is moral? Now, that was a very strange way to turn around what she said and turn it into a question, but she never took the bait with that kind of question. She says, I would say that a selective and discriminate sex life is not an indulgence. The term indulgence implies that it is an action taken lightly and casually. I say that sex is one of the most important aspects of a man's life, and therefore must never be approached lightly or casually. A sexual relationship is proper only on the ground of the highest values one can find in a human being. Sex must not be anything other than a response to values. And that is why I consider promiscuity immoral, not because sex is evil, but because sex is too good and too important. Then they ask her, does that mean in your view that sex should involve only married partners? Not necessarily. What sex should involve is a very serious relationship.
Yay.
I think that's clear.
I think it's clear too. Let me know if you have any questions out there, but
because getting back to, again, some of the answers that we saw in that earlier Ayn Rand forum chat, it's amazing how much baggage people bring in. People, it's the silliest thing, but maybe it's not silly. People say that Ayn Rand wrote in her time. So Atlas Shrugged was released in 1957, and you're at the very beginning of Betty Friedan and the sexual revolution that led into the crazy 60s. She was just in, and so, she had some unusual aspects of her own personal romantic life, but, it was just the dawning of that era. It was the new sexual liberty. And she was writing for that time, but she was bringing a lot of the old traditions too. And her ideas of propriety had a lot to do with the culture, blah, 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 blah. Crap, garbage, nonsense. I know there's some of that, and people really want to latch onto. Well, in her time, God, she was so much writing out of her time.
Right, she was.
Even in regard to her ideas about sexuality, but even her fiction in sexuality.
Yeah.
She was not a woman of her time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. Whatever. Yeah. Those folks. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we know, of course, that contra Andrea Dworkin, it's not the case that all sex is rape. Actually, it turns out Andrea Dworkin was not the person who originated the expression all sex is rape. That's the conclusion that the people who read her radical feminist work said, but it remained for her admirers to actually come up with that expression. But in researching this passage on the Fountainhead, I came across exactly somebody with that mentality. There's a writer's website out there, The Right Woman, And this writer has an article specifically with regard to it, titled An Engraved Invitation to Rape. Of course, she had heard Ayn Rand's answer to that question. And Ayn Rand said, again, if this was rape, it was rape by engraved invitation, meaning it wasn't rape, it wasn't sexual assault. But this woman goes on and on and on about Ayn Rand. And the reason I bring in the Andrea Dworkin references, she regards everything that Ayn Rand wrote in her fiction with regard to sexuality. I don't know how much of Ayn Rand's fiction she read, but obviously The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, she regarded all of it as assault and sadomasochistic. Now, some of you will laugh, but unfortunately, some of you will say, yeah. And it's the strangest thing, because I know objectivists who imagine Ayn Rand as this, I won't even say, just their idea of kink and S&M and really crazy wild sex life. And don't get me wrong, I have nothing against those things, but really they're bringing their own stuff into it. So this woman writes not just about Dominique and Rourke's relationship, but even in regard to Atlas Shrugged. She says, Rand develops Dagny Taggart as a strong, independent, and economically enterprising woman. However, in her romantic relationships with the three leading male characters, her economic and social status is contradicted by the sexual dominance of her male partners. In every love scene between Dagny and her sexual partner, the scene is depicted as if it were rape. I would not even go so far as to say that these scenes were written as romanticized rape, for the sexual act is not romanticized at all. In fact, what makes the portrayal so interesting is the spotlight placed on violent dominance and submission, which is stark and overt. Coupled with that feature is Rand's depiction of Dagny's seeming willing participation in these acts. Unquote.
Her seeming willing? What? Like she was the one who was actually controlling everything.
Everything in really in all three of those relationships. Think of the climax, if I can use that word, of the novel, or at least the sexual romantic part of the novel, in which she leads through the tunnels of Taggart Transcontinental, this poor man who can't possibly do anything but follow her. And she's talking to herself through the narration. She's like, if you are who you are, if the time we spent together in the valley means what it meant, you will follow me. Honestly, you will follow me.
The symbolism is there, everybody. Dagny is saying, hey, John, why don't you come follow me into my tunnel?
Oh, you have no choice. Come on. No choice. This writer repeatedly compares Dagny's sexual domination to sadomasochism. Anyway, that's just a bunch of hooey. And somebody who hasn't actually thought about this very clearly or deeply, or doesn't really care to, and is just looking to cherry pick and come up with something to justify their assumption that they already have. Here, you tell me if this is sadomasochism or rape fantasy. That summer, she met him in the woods, in hidden corners by the river, on the floor of an abandoned shack in the cellar of a house. These were the only times when she learned to feel a sense of beauty, by looking up at wooden rafters or the steel plate of an air conditioning machine that whirred tensely, rhythmically above their heads. She wore slacks or cotton summer dresses, yet she was never so feminine as when she stood beside him, sagging in his arms, abandoning herself to anything he wished, in open acknowledgement of his power to reduce her to helplessness by the pleasure he had the power to give her. He taught her every manner of sensuality he could invent. Isn't it wonderful that our bodies can give us so much pleasure, he said to her once, quite simply.
Yeah.
They were happy and radiantly innocent. They were both incapable of the conception that joy is sin. They kept their secret from the knowledge of others, not as a shameful guilt, but as a thing that was immaculately theirs, beyond anyone's right of debate or appraisal. She knew the general doctrine on sex, held by people of one form or another, that the doctrine that sex was an ugly weakness of man's lower nature, to be condoned regretfully. She experienced an emotion of chastity that made her shrink not from the desires of her body, but from any contact with the minds who held this doctrine.
That's so beautiful. And, there's a particular scene where I forget exactly how it goes, but Dagny goes up to Francisco and they're in the woods and they're hiking and she says something like she was starting to compare herself to some of the other girls in her school classes.
This is even before they actually began sleeping together. Yes.
Yes. And
yes, this is incredibly passionate.
Oh my gosh. And so she starts talking as if she didn't respect herself, as if she actually cared about comparing herself to others. And and she knew she was deliberately trying to provoke him. She was deliberately trying to get him angry.
She's like, she says, well, I've always been unpopular in school and it didn't bother me, but now I've discovered the reason. It's an impossible kind of reason. They dislike me, not because I do things badly, but because I do them well. They dislike me because I've always had the best grades in class. I don't even have to study. I always get A's. Do you suppose I should try to get D's for a change and become the most popular girl in school? Francisco stopped, looked at her, and slapped her face. What she felt was contained in a single instant, while the ground rocked under her feet. In a single blast of emotion within her, she knew that she would have killed any other person who had struck her.
Yep.
She felt the violent fury that would have given her the strength for it, and as violent a pleasure that Francisco had done it.
Oh, well.
And so I'll skip some of the explanation, but she says to Francisco, "Did I hurt you as much as that?"
Yeah.
He looked astonished. The question and the smile were not those of a child. He answered, "Yes, if it pleases you." It does. But don't ever do that again. Don't crack jokes of that kind.
Right.
Don't be a fool. Whatever made you think that I cared about being popular? When you grow up, you'll understand what sort of unspeakable thing you said. I understand it now. It's funny because he takes a handkerchief, he goes to, clean the blood and the bruise on her face. "Come here," he ordered. She laughed, stepping back. "Oh no, I want to keep it as it is. I hope it swells terribly. I like it." There's Dominique on the side of the bathtub there.
Yeah, and there is Dominique slapping the cheek of Howard Rourke, with her writing stick.
And don't you dare take that away from her.
That's absolutely right. And all of these things, I don't know of any other author who writes this way and like in such depth and detail and with so much frequency of this kind of spiritual values being played off of one another. And, and that kind of playfulness that, where they have, this is what I mean to you. And here are some creative ways to get that knowledge from you and how much I mean to you, and back and forth that way. I mean, there are better words to say it, but that's the best I can do right now. But that whole foreplay of spiritual values going on is highly sexual.
Yes. Now, Allie has said, and she's not the first person in the chat to say it, damn, they got some foreplay then. Now, this is not the first time foreplay has come up in the chat. Everything is foreplay. Every freaking thing is foreplay. If you don't have that sense that everything is foreplay, you need to live a sexier life. I'm not kidding when I say, if you define your terms broadly enough, everything is sex.
Yeah, I mean, everything is values.
Also, Chris Smith seems to have your number. Christopher says, "I've never washed my face since Simon LeBon slapped me." Whoa.
I wouldn't either. If he slapped me, I
wouldn't either. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know about me, but you certainly.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. But I mean, any interaction that you have with another human being, and of course there are contexts, obviously a sister and a brother is not going to act like this with each other. But, if you're in that situation and, you are single and you're looking for a love interest, you're going to take note of those sorts of that kind of value play, however you would call it. What?
Sorry, the chat is hilarious tonight. And I've missed a bunch of it. I'm just catching up here. So since we've gone past the half-hour mark here, I just need to stop and say thank you for the super chat and keep bringing it on. Any super chats that you submit. And further, if you join and become members on the YouTube channel of the Ayn Rand Center UK, it all supports the Ayn Rand Center UK. You can support on the website. You can go to aynrandcenter.co.uk and become a member. And every month you give them a little love, and you're a member of the Ayn Rand Center UK. You get access to a lot of extra stuff. But we also have the membership on YouTube. This is separate, but very cool. You see the people with the extra icon and with access to these awesome emojis. There's rumors going around that there might eventually be a Robert Nasir and Amy Nasir emoji. I'm not sure I want that to happen. The ones we've got are already awfully cute. They added a Lisa Van Dam emoji today.
Yeah.
That was cool. And
I think it would be nice to have an emoji, honestly.
You want an emoji of yourself?
Sure.
Oh, wow. Well,
let's do it. Why not?
You only get access to those emojis if you join the channel. So you should be a member on the website, aynrandcenter.co.uk, and the link is in the chat. You should be a member on the YouTube. And I'll tell you what, I'm a host, right? I get all the props. I get all the free goodies, right? No, I'm a member, just like you're going to be. And I'm a member on the YouTube channel, just like you should be. I mean, I'm rich. It costs me nothing compared to the kind of money that I bring in. But, oh, wait, I'm not rich. No, you should be a member both on YouTube, and I'll leave it at that because I got to get back to the chat. This is absolutely hilarious.
And before you do, though, I just want to mention that if you like our other work on our other channel, which is the Robert Nasir channel on YouTube.
Oh my God, yes, cross promotion.
5 Minutes with Robert Nasir is a hour-long program that we do on YouTube, live streamed every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So if you want more information about that, or if you would like to become a patron or a supporter, we appreciate any donation you may offer us. We are at robertnasir.com, and I'll go ahead and put that in the chat.
Cool. I like that. Oh, wait, I'm Robert Nasir. Of course I like that. Yes, you can join us on Sundays at 6 p.m. Eastern time, 1 hour later than this show. And it's the same thing, but more personal, sillier.
Yes, it's much
just as sexy.
Yeah, just as sexy, but it's a little bit more it's a little bit tiny bit less philosophical, but it's just much more casual.
Now, the oldsters out there, those of you who were born in the 60s, 70s, 80s, or earlier, who knows, will remember what happened in the 1980s. Because to me, that was the beginning of the assault on pleasure, the pleasure police. Things were becoming more and more liberal as time went by. You saw, Atlas Shrugged is published in 1957. This is also the beginning of the sexual revolution. Everything went nuts in the 60s, but the 70s were pretty wild too. And the 80s, the greatest decade ever, but that's when it started clamping down. And you started seeing, especially conservatives, clamp down on the idea of pleasure. These damned hedonists out there are destroying America, destroying society. And it got worse. It got worse and worse over time. Into the 90s, you saw, well, it wasn't just about sex. It wasn't just about loose morals. It was about cigarette smoking or junk food. And it got worse and worse, and it's still getting worse. And it's no longer just the right. It's, in some ways, it's even worse on the left, at least in regard to things like getting a large soft drink in New York City. Don Watkins wrote in 2010 in the Ayn Rand Institute website, "Anti-Smoking Paternalism, a Cancer on American Liberty." And it's a good article. I've got a link in the show notes on my Facebook. You can pull that up. He writes, "From trans fat bans to bicycle helmet laws to prohibitions on gambling, the government is increasingly abridging our freedom on the grounds that we are not competent to make rational decisions in these areas." And he points out that because of Social Security and the FDA, they believe they have an interest in this. this was warned about back in the 80s. I remember Rush Limbaugh talking about it. If they control your medical care, then they should have some right to say whether you should be exercising and whether you should be allowed to eat junk food. After all, they have to pay when you get sick. And the more enmeshed it's gotten, the worse that has gotten. The pleasure police have gotten worse and worse. So that when in 2012, through really 2014, when political correctness got its dose of steroids, you saw it infecting sexuality. And that's when consent became a thing. Now, I'm all for consent. Obviously, I believe that people shouldn't have sex unless they both consent to have sex. But you remember how that came up? I mean, it got to where on college campuses, in fraternities and sororities, they would pass out mimeographed, photocopied sheets of checklists so that I'm going on a date tonight. I need you to initial this, that you are signing off on that we will hold hands, and you are signing off on that we will kiss, and you are signing off that I will put my hand on your shirt, and you are signing off that I will put my hand under your shirt. It's the craziest thing. And it's only gotten worse. Obviously, those forms no longer exist because now it's just assumed that you better not make anybody unhappy or you are just guilty having suffered the accusation.
So if anybody remembers, if anybody's seen the movie Young Frankenstein, the Mel Brooks film, with Gene Wilder and Madeline Kahn and everybody, which is one of our favorite films, there's such a funny scene. Gene's character, Dr. Frankenstein, and I'm forgetting her name. Anyway, Madeline's character, she is wishing him goodbye at the train station, on the train platform, and he goes in to kiss her, and she's like, oh, not the lips. No, I'm going to a party afterwards, and I want to make sure that they're okay. And he reaches for her hair. Oh, not the hair. No, not the hair. I and then he reaches around her, and she's like, taffeta, darling. He's like, taffeta. And
no, it's taffeta, the dress.
It wrinkles so easily, taffeta. And so eventually, it's like at the very end, they don't kiss, they don't hug, he doesn't touch her, stroke her hair, and they end up doing this with the elbows.
Didn't that take you to COVID? Like, can you figure out some way that we can shake hands that might be safe?
But it's like that, it's like, yes, oh, may I kiss you? May I kiss your cheek? Yes, you may kiss my cheek.
Yes.
May I stroke your hair, darling? Yes, you may stroke my hair. I mean, honestly, that it is insulting to adults or even people on college campuses who are adults to infantilize them, treat them like babies, treat them like they can't make up their own decisions, treat them like they can't have intimate relationships with other people.
Exactly right.
It is an insult to the idea of higher education, that you're going to invite people to your university and then you're going to tell them, no, you must have consent forms and checklists in order to be intimate.
It's sad. I have a friend of mine, he had teenage son, 16 years old, and he is doing everything he can to advise this poor young boy not to have sex. I'm thinking that's the exact opposite advice you should be giving him. He's young. He should be sowing his wild oats. He should be enjoying, and he should be doing it responsibly. He should be doing it safely, using all manner of protection and being honest with his partners and all those good things. He's like, no, if he sleeps with somebody and then she gets mad, she could accuse him of rape and ruin his whole life. Like, you can't live that way, and you can't scare a child into living that way. There are ways you can protect yourself, but at some point you've got to live. My God, you cannot let them Karen your sex life.
Right. Karen your sex life. Oh, I feel so bad for all those people out there named Karen. So
my advice for you all is don't let them Karen your sex life.
Yeah.
I hate that expression, Karen, but it makes the point. You just can't let them win. Remember, there was a cleric. This was a news story in 2010. An Iranian cleric back when we still kind of thought about the Iranians in the Middle East and the fact that they're going to destroy the world. And AZ, you're right. Karen is a very nice name. And there are some great actresses named Karen who we used to idolize, and now the sociologists have ruined the name. There was a cleric in Iran, headlines in the newspaper, New York Times, everywhere. The headline was, "Promiscuous women cause earthquakes."
That's so true.
And I thought to myself, hell, I've known that since I was a teenager. The best kind of earthquakes.
Like the ACDC song, right? Yes.
Promiscuous women do cause earthquakes, and God bless them for that.
Yes.
And the reason I have to wrap up on an irreverent note is because there's another thing we need to talk about. And that's Rome.
Oh.
And I don't mean Rome today. I mean Rome of the 1st century AD. And the question is Rome burning, and are most of us playing the fiddle? You know, fiddling used to be a euphemism for self-gratification, which makes me wonder if that's where this supposed story about Emperor Nero comes from.
Could be.
He was fiddling while Rome was burning. So we're going to talk about that next week. But let us know if you have any thoughts. You can enter them here in the chat. You can put them in the 5 Minutes with Robert Nasir Facebook group, which you can find via robertnasir.com, or just message me, Facebook, Twitter. By the way, I'm all over Twitter these days. I hate Twitter. I never liked Twitter, but all of a sudden I'm on Twitter for 2 reasons. One, Musk is there. It's Musk's house. I don't even think of it as Twitter anymore. I call it Musk's house. And 2, because I have a Substack now, and Substack and Twitter integrate well. So if you're not yet signed up for my Substack, go to my Twitter, twitter.com/Robert. Go to robertnasir.com. All the links are there. Sign up for my Substack. Eventually, I will say brilliant things. I've already put 3 posts up. You decide for yourself whether they're brilliant or not. But yes, if you have an answer to the question, is Rome burning? And are we recklessly fiddling while that's happening? I want to hear it. And we're going to talk Allie says she's charging me $3 for free speech again. I was on a free speech platform, and I noticed Musk spent, what was it now, $43 billion, $53 billion for Twitter. I'm like, damn, free speech is expensive. Now Allie wants to charge me for it because I made that point. I told you, you send me your bank account number, your routing number, I will make sure that money comes to you.
And don't forget your social security number.
That would help. That would be good too. So thank you for joining us for sex.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us for sex. And thanks for having sex with ARCUK.
The only thing rapey, God, I hate that word, rapey. The only thing rapey about the Fountainhead is in the minds of people who don't get it. I bristle a little bit because there are certain objectivists who come right back and say, oh, well, people have rape fantasies. Ayn Rand had rape fantasies.
I don't know.
She did want. She is said to have answered another interview question on the topic. She was asked, "Where do these ideas about sex come from in your stories?" She is said to have answered, "Wishful thinking." But if you understand Ayn Rand's view of sexuality, again, she wasn't wishing for rape. No. She just wanted men to be men and women to be women, and for people, both sexes, to be
valuers.
To be more passionate, to live your best, most passionate life.
Yes.
This is about passion.
Yes.
And passion is the right word. And in that regard, there's no such thing as too much.
Well, why don't you come over here, Robert, and rub elbows with me?
Ooh, well, we'll do more than that. We will join you in Clubhouse. So let's talk. Let's go over to Clubhouse. I want to hear your feedback on today's topic. Do you think the pleasure police have destroyed romance and passion? Do you think there was anything wrong with that trigger warning scene in the Fountainhead? And it really is one. Again, rape is a bad thing, and sensitive people read that. I'm all for giving that trigger warning if necessary, but that's not ultimately what was going on. Yeah, Robin says, wanting men to be men and women to be women is a lot to ask for nowadays. Well, that's why we're doing a show on it. That's why we had to do an episode, because we are here to tell you, you should be men. You should be women. You should be who you are. And Ayn Rand, more than anybody else, makes that possible.
And you should enjoy sex.
You should enjoy sex.
You should enjoy
And
sex
again,
with yourself.
Sex
And
broadly.
sex with people you care about.
You should enjoy
and
romance in movies.
And try to find somebody special. So
you should enjoy sex in all the ways that sex comes up, he said knowingly. So thank you for joining us. We're going over to Clubhouse. This has been Life on Earth, and we're glad you're here.